Before I begin, I just want to introduce this CD. It's a CD about, it's not our CD, it's a CD put out by a man called Larry Hannigan. Now, his website is there on the board, www.larryhannigan.com. This is about the flag and the Constitution. It's actually compulsory listening for any Aussie who's still got the ability to listen, and still do. Now, there's one issue on this CD, and that's what we need to clarify. To activate Section 80 of the Commonwealth Constitution in relation to trial by jury, that section only operates on what you call an indictment. Now, if you do not have an indictment, they will not permit you to activate Section 80 for trial by jury of an offence against any law of the Commonwealth. How do you get an indictment? Now, in normal process, if you lay a private prosecution charge, the DPP, either state or Commonwealth, is supposed to look after that and run the trial on your behalf. Now, because the state and Commonwealth DPP are in this UN program, you've got Buckley's and Nunn making that happen. But what you do have to get an indictment is you've got the right to take the matter into the full court of the Supreme Court in Victoria and apply for a grand jury hearing once the DPPs do not present. Now, that right is there today, and it's probably the only right you will have left to bring this matter before a court. And I'm not talking about judge-only court. I'm talking about grand jury is 23 people chosen from an electoral roll, which then goes on to a normal jury trial issue. Understand and learn grand jury processes. The courts have got about 60 stacked there, probably 100. They don't want to hear them because they know the grand jury will give an indictment in relation to what you're going to see tonight. So don't just look at what you're going to see tonight. Start to get active. This is a very good CD. There's a bit on the back of it, or on the back of this presentation in relation to this. We just wanted to introduce it at the beginning because it's a compulsory CD. That is just the front cover of a book, which we use that because it embodies the whole process. Global tyranny, step by step, the United Nations and the emerging New World Order. The European Union is the catalyst that they'll use to do all that with. Australia has already been handed over to it. So you've still got an opportunity to stop them doing that in this country, if you know what you're doing. But I can clearly tell you now that if you leave God out of the equation, you've actually committed legal suicide, because you cannot get through this without this. Now, it's the United Nations trap. I think that's a pretty appropriate heading, because that's certainly what it is. Now, we started here with saying, well, who is the United Nations? I don't think too many people here would know who they are, but they intend to hold you and own you. What is the spirit of the UN? Now, that's very, very important, because what they do give you out of the UN is apparently what you call the Charter of Human Rights. Now, human rights mean diddly squat in relation to spiritual rights. So what they will not give you is your spiritual right. They'll give you human rights because they work the spirit realm in the UN. What is the allegiance of the UN? Now, I don't think in any of the stuff I've looked at that we can find an allegiance. Now, let me make it quite clear here tonight. In relation to the Crown of the United Kingdom, I'm not a monarchist, and neither am I a Republican. I'm simply here to say that either of those sides are going to slam dunk you. Now, there it says Charter for Global Democracy, a charter to achieve global governance. I love the way they use words that are really not the correct word. A charter to achieve global governance has been developed for presentation at the Millennium Assembly in September. It was made available to the public on UN Day, October 24, 1999. Now remember the date. because of the next slide. Now see here it says at the bottom, we added that, global democracy is in fact international socialism. So they use a word that appears to be a word that appears to be okay, but in actual fact it's the opposite. Now remember I said, remember the date, October 1999. The Commonwealth of Australia voted on November 1999 for the Australian people voted in a constitutional referendum on whether Australia should become a republic and whether to insert a preamble to the... So in October 1999 you all went to the things relative to a referendum and you said no, we're staying with what we know. What they never told you is in October of 1999 the UN had already voted to bring Australia in. Now should I repeat that? Because that's the biggest slam dunk you've ever had. So it effectively means your November 1999 issue was overridden by the UN. Now all your boys here knew all that, which is why an act appeared in Victoria in May 2000 that took the Oath of Allegiance out of the Legal Practice Act in Victoria, which in actual fact meant that we don't respect your referendum decision. And it actually means that when the Oath of Allegiance comes out of the Legal Practice Act, no lawyer in Victoria is acting legally. They're under another jurisprudence now. It's a UN one. Because they're not stupid enough, they're all lawyers, to actually say, well, I'll probably put my legal career in jeopardy unless they've been told by somebody else, we're going to look after you. But what's the intention? To slam dunk the Aussie. Because the first thing the Aussie thinks, well, we better take this to the courtrooms. We better get a lawyer. The problem is all the lawyers have already got rid of the Oath of Allegiance. Are you getting the point? Which means your lawyers sold you out first. Next one, please. United Nations. Now, this is very important. Soviet nationals who outranked the generals of the United States Armed Forces, who by agreement have submitted their forces to the United Nations Security Council. Now look at the boys of the security boys. United Nations Under Secretary of the Security Council. The following is a list of names of Soviet nationals who have held the above post in the United Nations, thereby having every military force in the world submit to them. Now you'll see shortly that Jeffries, your former governor of West Australia, the head of the SAS, is clearly involved in this program. And all he's done is pass the baton to Quentin Bryce. We'll see that. Now, since 1946, all of these are Soviet nationals, and comes down to 1988. There's the names of who held those posts. So, in essence, you're handing your kids over to communism. Is that clear there? Is that clear?
Yep.
Well, a lot of your preachers in this town are sitting quiet on this. And in essence, they're not doing what they should be doing in relation to God. If anyone should be honest in this issue, it should be the preacher. I'm saying that quite clearly. Because of an accountability with God. United Nations and communism. It was primarily communist in tone. Its charter, signed in 1943, being based upon the Constitution of Soviet Russia. Do you like those words? It links it to Russia. While its purpose and principles were decided at a conference of foreign ministers held in Moscow, the secretaries of the United Nations Security Council between the years 1946 and 1962 were, those two people, both communist. A leading figure of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organisation, UNESCO, that's the one that's going to get the children. That's the one that's dictating all the policies of how the kids get educated throughout the world. Was that person, a communist. The Chief Secretary for UNESCO was Madame Jelova, communist, while the President, Vice President and 9 judges of the World Court were all communist. That's from the Broken Cross. Whenever you go into a law court, you can put that stuff in as long as you quote the source.